I wanted to share my thoughts around why do we need to build human-centric AI and why do we need to build emotional intelligence into our technology? What are the applications of this technology today and in the future? And perhaps most importantly, what are the ethical considerations and moral implications of building empathy and emotional intelligence into our technology? So how do you go about building emotional intelligence into technology? What does that look like? If we dissected how humans communicate, only 10% of how we communicate is in the choice of words we use. 90% is nonverbal, and it's split equally between our facial expressions, which are very, very expressive and communicative, our vocal intonations, and our gestures. I've spent the most of my career focusing on the face. As you can tell, I'm pretty expressive. And as it turns out, the science of facial emotions has existed for over 200 years, starting with the work of Duchenne and later on Charles Darwin, and then more recently Paul Ekman and his team in the 70s, who have really mapped every facial muscle into a code. So for example, when you smile, you are activating the zygomatic muscle, which is action unit 12. If you do a brow furrow, that's the corrugator muscle, and that's action unit 4. To become a certified face reader or fax coder, you have to go through hundreds of hours of training, and it's a very laborious exercise to then be able to code what expressions are happening on the human face. So instead, we use computer vision and machine learning to automate that process, and it essentially looks like the following. We provide the algorithm or the computer with hundreds of examples, hundreds of thousands of examples of people smiling or smirking or frowning, and the machine is able to look for all the things that are similar between people's smiles and people's smirks, and it learns. The more data you give it, the better it becomes. The more diverse data you give it, the better and more robust and more accurate it becomes. And I'll come back to the diversity, the data diversity issue in a second. So you train these algorithms to detect these different nonverbal signals. We started off with the face and later on added vocal intonations, and then we're continuing to add things like activities like eating or drinking or sleeping. And again, the more data you feed it, the more sophisticated, if you like, the machine becomes. There are so many applications of this technology. When we first started, actually, when I first came to MIT as a postdoc right after my PhD, I explored the applications of the technology for autism. We envisioned, this was way back in 2006, so it was way before Google Glass, but we essentially envisioned something like a Google Glass. So a pair of glasses with a little camera that sits in the middle, and kids on the autism spectrum wore the glasses, and it was connected to a device that in real time gave them, it was like a coach, a real-time coach. It gave them real-time feedback on the expressions of people they were interacting with. Now, the issue with autism is often individuals on the spectrum find the face so overwhelming, they avoid face and eye contact altogether. So they're completely missing out on that 90% of communication we're talking about, which impacts their ability to make friends if they're in school, their ability to keep jobs if they're adults. So it has a lot of dire consequences. With this device, it gamified the whole thing. It gave you points every time you actually made face contact, and it provided a real-time incentive to learn about these expressions and incorporate them into your communication. We found that the kids, we deployed this in a school in Providence. The kids were getting really better with their social interactions, which was awesome. But it was still kind of a research project. It was funded by the National Science Foundation. So it was limited in scope, if you like. So in parallel, being at the Media Lab at MIT, we started to get a lot of commercial interest in the technology. And I should say at that point, my career aspirations was to become faculty at MIT. I wasn't at all thinking about starting a company, and I was in fact getting ready to apply for a faculty position. But I remember, twice a year at the Media Lab, we would invite all of these corporate sponsors and it for show and tell. So you would show your latest and greatest. In fact, we called it demo or die to kind of underscore how important it was to showcase your technology. So for a number of years in a row, we would showcase the autism application of this technology, and all these companies, all these Fortune 500 companies like Bank of America or Procter & Gamble or Toyota, Google, they all wanted to use the technology to quantify people's emotional experiences for a variety of reasons. So I kept a log of all these different use cases. Every time a company said, oh, we want to use this for X, Y, and Z, I just kept a list of all these different scenarios. And when the list got to about 20 or so companies, Roz Picard, who was the MIT professor I was working with, and myself, we barged into our lab director's office and we said, Frank, we need more resources because we're ignoring all of this industry's interest. And he said, it's time for you to spin out. And I thought a lot about it because obviously I was changing my career aspirations. And for me, what was really the tipping point was I felt like I had a unique opportunity to take a technology that had a lot of potential for good and scale it, bring it to the world at a global scale. From the get-go, Roz and I remember when we were first starting, we recognized that there were so many applications of this technology. Everything from improving road safety by detecting driver drowsiness to quantifying mental health in ways that has not been done before, right? There are facial and vocal biomarkers for things like stress, anxiety, depression, suicidal intent, Parkinson's. Imagine if we can detect all of that just off of your cell phone. Very, very transformative. But at the same time, we recognize that this data is very personal and there is a lot of potential for abuse. So we wanted to decide on a set of core values that, if you like, would become our North Star in how we made decisions as a company. These are well encapsulated into 3 criteria. First, the importance of consent and opt-in. So any place where we feel that people are not really opting in, or they're not consenting, or they don't really understand exactly how the technology is being used, that we would decline that business, even if it meant turning business and revenue away. The second was about this understanding of power asymmetry, right? Often cases, and it's very true in a lot of the tech giants around us, and in a few cases governments, they have access to most of the data about us. And we have very little control about how that data is being used. And we felt, and often as a consumer, you don't even get value in return for sharing this very personal data. So for me, I wanted to make sure that the applications we engage in, that our users they're getting some value in return for sharing this data. It could be monetary value. In some use cases, we pay people to share this data with us. But in other cases, it's a value like improving, their road safety, for instance. We were prioritizing things like the ethics of the technology, that we had to make sure that our algorithms were not biased. This is really important. For me, this is like the biggest issue right now in the space of artificial intelligence. It's not that the robots are going to take over the universe. Honestly, it's that we're just building bias into these systems and then deploying them at scale, unintentionally, but with really dire consequences. So for us at Affectiva, we really prioritize mitigating data and algorithmic bias. The number one way to do this is to ensure that the team that is designing and deploying these AI technologies is diverse and is inclusive. And we go, I'm not going to pretend that we're done. We're a work in progress, like a lot of the industry, but we really prioritize that. I also, as part of mitigating data and algorithmic bias, we have to ensure that our data is diverse. So far, we have collected over 9.5 million facial videos from 90 countries around the world through our work with 25% of the global Fortune 500 companies. So it's a very diverse data set. We need to ensure that we sample it in the right way, that there's equal representation of different ages and genders and ethnicities, and maybe even people wearing the hijab or people with beards or facial masks. We've had to retrain our algorithms now that a lot more people are engaging with us with facial masks. And to make sure that this is a priority for the company, we're a small startup. We've raised about $53 million in venture funding. We're about 100 people. So we're relatively small, right? And we're always and continuously under a lot of pressure as a company to bring product to market and bring new features to the market. But I've actually tied our leadership's bonus plan to, one of the main kind of criteria in this bonus plan is ensuring that our algorithms are not biased. I know from talking to other peers in the industry that this is not common practice, but I honestly believe that until we do that, companies like ours and other companies in the AI space may not really prioritize ensuring that their algorithms are not biased. It's hard because there's this tension between bringing product to market faster and then doing it the right way. And I feel like we have to incentivize doing it the right way. And I've been advocating very vocally about that. So anyway, way back when we spun out of MIT, these were our 3 criteria, and we got tested on them. So a few years later, our seed money was running out, and we were back raising money, and we got a phone call from the venture arm of an intelligence agency, and they said, "We've been following you for years, very curious about your work. We think there's a lot of application in the space of lie detection and surveillance and security, and we'd like to give you $40 million of funding." And I remember we were literally like 2 months away from running out of money and not making payroll. So for us, it was a real decision moment, right? On the one hand, we could take this money, we'd have to pivot, but the company would continue to exist. On the other hand, if we didn't take the money, we might cease to exist altogether. So we had this existential question. But I remember going back home one night and just kind of imagining what the world would look like if we took that money, and pivoting to working on this. And I just really didn't feel that was in line with why we started Affectiva. Our start was in autism and bridging this communication gap between people, between companies. We basically turned down that funding and instead hunkered down on finding investors that shared our core values and our approach. And we were able to do that. And we raised $7 million that summer. So not as much as we could have, but I really think, these investors are still very supportive of the company, and they continue to share our core values. So I think aligning with your investors, and honestly, we need more investors who prioritize AI ethics, who look for startups and companies that have these strong core values. So it's not just about the AI innovators and thought leaders and founders and entrepreneurs. I think the entire ecosystem needs to evolve to value these core values like ethics and like data bias and diversity and inclusion. We raised $26 million in 18 months ago, and I was adamant that this time round I bring in investors that are really representative of our commitment to diversifying AI. And so we were able to bring in Motley Fool Ventures and Trend Forward Capital. They both have female partners, and they also have a black person as one of their partners as well. So I'm just really proud that we were able to extend our commitment to building AI ethically, not just internally with our team, but also our investors and who we choose to partner with. Again, excited to be doing this, and I fundamentally believe that in building human-centric AI, we have an opportunity to not only reimagine human-machine interfaces, but really transform human-to-human communication.